What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I'm your co-host, Jack McCarthy, and I'm super excited to kick off today's episode. I think this is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to hearing here on Creative Juice. Last week, we talked a lot about structuring your marketing campaigns, how to run them, how to look for results, and more specifically, what to do when you run a test and how to look back on your test and determine how your results worked, what you learned from them, and things of that nature. So in the spirit of that, we thought it would be kind of interesting in this podcast episode to look back at some previous episodes of Creative Juice and put together a list of some of the biggest themes, lessons, strategies, and topics that we've covered in the past few months on the podcast to give you guys a little bit of a highlight reel and kind of John Madden the Creative Juice podcast. So Corinne and I polled the rest of the Indepreneur team and had them curate some of what they considered the top moments of the Creative Juice podcast in recent history, and we got together some real gems here. So I'm hoping you all are going to dig in. So without further ado, let's get into the highlight reel in this retro of Creative Juice.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Indepreneur.io.
Anytime you attempt to game the algorithm, what happens is that you train the algorithm to show your music to people who are not the people who like your music, right?
Right.
So any action that you do within the ecosystem of a recommendation engine affects the recommendation engine itself, and there's no tricking it because it knows who listens to what. Human behavior is so complex that once a recommendation engine or an algorithm or a machine learning model is trained on a specific type of behavior, there's no replicating like human actual like listener behavior with like bots or fellow artists that are like listening to engagement pods or whatever, engagement lists.
Right.
So yeah, like once again, like don't do that in any context, especially on Spotify, where like on Facebook, we have ways to, let's say that you run a bunch of crappy ads to your page to get likes from like Abu Dhabi, and now you have 10,000 Abu Dhabi likes, and they don't care about your posts, and your engagement is trash. We recently had an indie in the group who paid like someone on Fiverr over the course of like a month or two to pull off all their fake likes. And now their engagement is shot through the roof. They're organic.
Yeah.
There's no paying someone on Fiverr to re-engineer where you are in the Spotify recommendation engine latent vector space. That's all behind the scenes. It's behind a curtain, and it's long term, and you can't reverse direction, and you would have to create a new artist profile to even get a shot at clean data. So just don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I think like for me, when even my friends who are musicians or indies have been like, oh, Spotify, it's so flames right now. Right. And like everybody's worried about how to do things with Spotify. And I'm always just like, listen, to me, that's a data dark zone. I don't want to send anything there. I don't want to invest in it. I don't push my people to it. Like, my music's up there, but I don't do anything with it. And so I'm glad that we have something to say besides that, especially because there's a lot of information out there that just doesn't really jive with what I think I would even do if I were to put something into Spotify. So yeah, I'm just glad that now we can kind of be like, all right, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and, here's what we think about it. Because I think it's been a long time that people have been, indies have been asking us, like, okay, so Spotify, what is it? So yeah.
So like we interface with a lot of independent musicians, like a lot of them, it's remarkable how many we get to talk to. And so far, out of all those thousands of independent musicians that I've ever met, I've only met two who have been able to create results on Spotify with almost nothing else going on. Like no other forms of exposure. They weren't on a tour. They weren't on TV. They didn't have some big feature. They don't have great PR. It's all Spotify. And they've been young and rappers. That's it. So if all you're doing is Spotify.
Which really correlates with a lot of the IG crowd. you know?
Yeah,
like,
totally. It's very
I
IG.
think that
It's IG.
right. The way that rappers hustle on IG is totally different from what a lot of artists do. Not saying they're the only ones hustling, but they're definitely, there's a trend in hip hop, I think, where I see a lot of the same kind of messages and strategies being executed over there, especially with regards to Spotify, pushing people over there.
And we're talking about, high 5 to low 6 figures in both those instances and growing. And that's really great. But it occurred over a period of 2 to 3 years in both instances. Right. Very similar trajectories for both these use cases. And so that's anomalous.
That's an early edge too. Like they have to have been like strategizing this for a long time.
Well, there's still...
I think a lot of artists 3 years ago weren't really thinking that much about it.
There aren't many people trying out, despite that it's so obvious. They're like, it's also very scary because of how disastrous financially it could be if you do things like all the way wrong. Right. But there's not a lot of people running ads to Spotify without wasting money. Like record labels run ads to Spotify all the live long day, but not in a way that's like helpful to them.
Out now.
Yeah. Pookie remix out now.
What was the example you used?
Pookie. Lil Pump's Pookie remix is out now, guys. Check it out. But yeah, no.
Exactly.
So, okay. So knowing that is to say that there's tons of other people I've seen get to like high 5, low 6 figures on Spotify receipts alone, but they're doing other stuff. They had a sick blog PR campaign. They had a big debut album. They used to have another band that was huge, and now they have like the fallout from that, or they restructured, or they're doing other marketing, or they were on Jimmy Fallon. Right. Like there's all these different. Something else was going on, right? To maybe explain why they have such great results on Spotify as well, and they're not doing nearly the volume of direct to Spotify advertising that these other two use cases I know are. So that is to say that, like, if your plan is to go and spend all your money running traffic to Spotify and you're not the exact right person, like things could get bad for you. Right. Just because if that weren't the case, I would see it happen more often with like your country artists, your folk artists, your ska artists and punk artists and all that. I would see it happen more often. There are also a lot of producers who do it, who are able to do it. So if you're, if you're like a lo-fi producer, or if you're, or if, even if you're an EDM, like of another verite producer. Yeah.
I was going to say like electronic ambient stuff can do well, or like acoustic, composition kind of stuff.
And that's because like there's just so much playlisting done around it. Exactly. Yeah. Like these are the listener use case. The user story for the listeners of this music is, I don't know the names of 90% of the artists that I listen to because they're on a playlist that I just click play on, and then I can do whatever the hell I need to do. So they're not like out there looking for like, oh, where's this artist on YouTube? Like, let me go buy their T-shirt. Like that's not usually the user story. There are these pockets, right? There's also like piano music, which is the same. Weirdly enough, piano music and lo-fi hip hop share the most on Spotify. Right. There's two genres that share the most about each other. They're all on these endless playlists where no one knows who the artists are. Oftentimes the artist is like not the actual artist, it's a fake artist. And you know what I mean? And they're just like running it up, like, different pianists that are making like 5 different artists with their piano compositions. Right. Throw it on a playlist. They're making racks. So there's a lot of weird pockets of success on Spotify, but what we definitely know is that it's not every genre can do this and only this and have success.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other like little facet of it is people who are making those kinds of things for playlists. Like they're making things that have almost purposefully a bland personality, so that they can end up on these, ambient background kind of playlists, because coffee shops use them, and spas and different retail places will use this stuff as background,
Yeah.
I've even seen coffee houses using like YouTube playlists for their background music, which was kind of entertaining because I asked that guy, like, why are you doing that? But, I think that there are some people who are like very specifically doing that. And it's almost as if their presence on Spotify, the reason they're making revenue is because they are scoping out which of these playlists are doing really well that aren't artist focused. And then they're creating music specifically to suit that potential.
Totally.
And then it has to be pretty good, like you have to be pretty good at doing that. But, I think that's tough. I wouldn't want to write my songs or compose my stuff around being a Spotify person, but I see why there are people who do it.
Well, okay, so
it's just not for rock. It wouldn't make sense,
It shares so much with my experience of writing for licensing aggregators. And it's funny because like Epidemic Sound is a licensing aggregator and they have fake like piano artists on Spotify. So it makes sense. But like, yeah, you all get like, it's usually a bunch of people who have their own artistic career, but they're doing this for money. And they're like, you get a spec, like you get like a pitch briefing from like your licensing aggregator. They're like, we are looking for this type of music. You pitch them 2 or 3 demos that are like really rough. And then you tell them what your collection of songs would be like and what your plan is. And they're like, okay, we'll give you this amount of money for that. And they secure it. But yeah, like it's making stuff to spec for the playlist. It's exactly what it is. The playlist is the pitch briefing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very interesting pockets of success on Spotify. But what we do know is that that like there is long-term success to be had on Spotify, but you need to be doing other things. You shouldn't put all your eggs in the Spotify basket in most cases. That said, if you have 2 years to devote a significant portion of time to building up on Spotify, you can get very, very far. Using methods that we don't particularly like, for dogmatic reasons, here at Indepreneur. Just because it's so commonly the case that things like pay to play and blog PR are stupid. Like I can give you the biggest intellectual argument for why those things are stupid. But when you bring in how the Spotify recommendation engine works, then I can't make that argument anymore because they contribute to that result insofar as you want that result really bad.
Many people who come to us who have not done a lot of robust advertising tell us that Facebook ads don't work. And a lot of the time when we investigate that further and have a deeper conversation with that person, the discussion ends up revealing that these people are using the boost button, right? Which it's not their fault. Facebook prompts you to use the boost button, right? The problem is that the boost button by default is not really set up to do anything good for you, right? If you go into, the Facebook Pages Manager, which most of us have, you're going to find that when there's a boost button in there, the automatic default audience for that boost button is going to be page likes and their friends. That's not what we want. Firstly, a lot of us, especially in the earlier days of our page, and I don't care if you've been on Facebook for 1 minute or for 10 years, your Facebook page probably was first populated by people who love you. So your family, your friends, you may have even solicited them to like and interact with your page. And that's really supportive and great, except that just because they love you doesn't mean that they love your music, and they don't necessarily look like the avatar, right? Or the type of person that Facebook's going to be looking for to actually inspire your music. So be inspired by your music. So if you press that boost button, basically it's going to be like, okay, I see mom and dad and best friend, and their friends who probably don't look anything like the customers that you're actually trying to reach with these ads. So the boost button, we're like, well, don't use the boost button, except that you can set up the boost button to actually make sense by tailoring your audiences. And we're going to get more into that in a minute. But specifically speaking to where the boost button fits, whether you're a beginner or you've, gone later on, this, by boosting to your green light warmth, you can basically keep everyone who's interacted with you, either your site, your Facebook, your IG, all of these different platforms. You can make sure that they're seeing your regular posts at a very low budget every single day, which means that this is feeding into the education and nurturing section of the buddy system, which we have many podcast episodes on. If you are just joining us, you can go ahead and scroll back and look at anything buddy system, and it'll explain far more to you. But I'm excited about being able to address this because I think that education and nurturing are the phases of the buddy system that indies get most confused by. Like, what do I do for this? You know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you raised a really good point in prefacing about how the boost button is by default set up to target people who love you, people who love you, and not as in your fans that love you, as in your friends, your best friends, your family members. And this kind of goes back to something that we talk about a lot of when it comes to just, how to promote your music as a whole. Something that I'm always talking to artists about and talking to friends about is like, stop spamming your friends and loved ones.
Yeah.
Don't you dare post a show flyer on your personal Facebook profile and tag all your friends on the photo. Don't do that. They don't want that. They love you, but they don't love when you do that. So if you think about the boost button as it can kind of be an extension of that same sort of idea that we're talking about avoiding. So being able to set it up as an ad strategy that you can use to hit the right people with your ads is really, really great, because you don't want to extend those bad organic practices with bad advertising practices. It's just a big waste of money.
And there's some things that are going to have kind of an assigned time of the year, right? So, it's not really as much of a thing anymore, but a lot of the bands I've worked with before, did Warped Tour, just like we did Warped Tour. And like, that's a fixed date. So when I would back plan from there, I know that Warped Tour isn't going to start later because I haven't done a project, So all of the things that we would do to prepare for that. So like merchandising and the logistics of, personnel and all of the set planning and the social structure and all of that stuff, then I was able to kind of back plan from a date instead of trying to, like, if I started today, when would it be done? And that's why you see a lot of artists, they might talk about how they're going to be in the studio or whatever, but a lot of artists won't talk about a project like an album until it's pretty much done, and then it's wrapped and like the marketing team is doing its job. So yeah, I think that's another thing that to keep in mind as you're doing these projects, especially if it's anything that's forward facing, is to be kind to yourself and not try to announce a date or announce a release or a tour before it's booked or before it's packaged or before, figure out when it's like, okay, now I can let the fans know that this is a real thing that's going to happen. Otherwise, you can put a lot of undue pressure on yourself to try to reach some kind of date when you don't really know what that project's going to look like yet.
Yeah. I think getting those major projects out there on the timeline and kind of moving them around until it feels like you can accomplish that's going to be your first thing. Now, if you're just coming into Indie Pro and you're one of our Indie Pro members and you're wondering, how do I deal with each of these trainings and each of these marketing campaigns that I could set up? Well, I try to approach everything, including with our business, including with, my personal projects and everything I'm doing here at East Room Studios. Like, I try to plan it out as, what are the things that will be automated once I finish them? And I try to do those first. You know what I mean? Like if you have a fan finder, right? You want to maybe get a fan finder out there running so that you have an asset that you can kind of turn on and off automatically and have it collecting you new listeners for you to remarket to once they're turned on to your music. Getting that out is a huge thing, because once you do, it's like a checkpoint. It's a bookmark. You can turn that on or off. You never have to redo that work in a technical sense. Same with getting your website ready. Same with getting your email list shored up via our email marketing for musicians training. All of the broadcasting, the campaigns that you send out to your email list on a week-to-week basis, that's the minutia. You need to do them manually, and they suck, and it's just like brushing your teeth, right? It needs to happen every day, and it's just, you got to get over it. But setting up the automation, that's something you do and then you don't have to redo for a very long time. And getting that stuff out of the way is important because it's really, you got to think about it as like setting up an employee, right? Your fan finder is like an employee in your business that goes out and finds you new listeners. Your automation campaigns and your email lists are like employees for your business that follow up with interested fans. Once you get them to work, they're working for you in the background. So getting them done first is kind of a primary goal. And then you can focus on your recurring content schedule, how you're going to be doing new things every week, the more maintenance style tasks.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to plan too, because automation is where glitches tend to happen, or your inexperience using a tool really starts to bear itself. And the last thing you want to be doing is like putting together automations like the day before something is supposed to launch and feeling a lot of pressure, feeling rushed, skipping a step, and you didn't even realize that you may have set something up in the automation that doesn't fire the way it's supposed to, and you've got 100 live people trying to come into it. I think that's the kind of stuff that you can easily set up in advance, test it out. In most cases, that's going to happen. I think there's only a couple of places, like if you're running a lead gen form on Facebook, which we don't recommend anyway, but if you were happening to do that, like you can't necessarily trigger zaps from a form that isn't built yet, So there's some things that you won't be able to build out as soon out as you'd like, but for the most part, you can build out all of this stuff before it's ever even active. All of your ManyChat sequences, all of the zaps that go from ManyChat or from your landing page to your mailing list. And the more that you kind of get ahead of it, not only does it give you more confidence for launch and take off some of the pressure, but it also gives you the true time you need to kind of feel like you've mastered that task. And I think that's really important too, is, making sure that you feel good about the tech that you're using and, not feeling any kind of pressure to be some kind of Superman and figure out everything in the last hour before things launch.
Those lower elements of the visual brand, you can start to at least get your ideas down for what you want that to be. And it all stems back to the answering those three questions and knowing what emotions and psychology you want to convey with your brand. And once you have a visual brand and you have an emotional or psychological brand, then it's all about consistently portraying those elements in all of your content. Every touch you have with an audience member should reinforce those notions. It should drive the point home. And that's what we call building brand equity. When you have 100 experiences with an artist and every time you're getting the same emotion and experience and it's all building on itself and it becomes this consistent expectation you can have of that artist, that's brand equity. And that's really what you're trying to build. That's why you're getting these elements in place.
Right. I mean, if you want to see this executed ad nauseum, go to Taylor Swift's Instagram profile. You know what I mean? Like this album cycle, she's like, she only put out one song. We've got, I don't know, there's probably like 20 tiles on there right now that are all these like, pastel, shiny, kind of elements. And then like the butterfly is kind of her mascot of this album cycle, and even if you talk to like influencer kids, right, who aren't doing music, or YouTubers, right? Like all of these people very much understand like what their brand is, right? And it's been kind of funny to watch because I consider myself old compared to a lot of these people. And it's been really interesting to see how many 20-somethings are talking about like my brand, right? And what their brand represents and what goes along with their brand and what fits their messaging and their awareness of something that used to be just a very marketing centric kind of topic, So you can probably find a lot of examples online of people who like have a certain aesthetic, like, if you go like Zach Farrow, who is the former and then back again drummer of Paramore, he's got another band called Half Noise, and like his entire Instagram is like stuff that looks like he pulled out pictures from his parents' shoebox of the 70s, and he shoots cars that are from the 70s and then puts this like grainy filter on it, and like all of his stuff looks like that, and the band of Half Noise all looks like that. I don't know how, but they found me, which is Dallin Falks, I think is his name. Oh, sorry if I butchered that, but he's the former bass player for Panic at the Disco. So he started a new band called I Don't Know How, but They Found Me. And his stuff is all like 80s and glitch and VCR influence. And like there's nothing like, just going to an artist's website and profile and seeing all of these things that are very much in sync. And so sometimes when somebody like retweets something, I'll see an image and I'll know it's I Don't Know How, but They Found Me, because it's got that vibe,
right.
And I'm like, it's coming,
Yeah.
So you can find a lot of examples out there. If you feel like, gosh, this seems like I have to figure out a lot of stuff. Well, yeah, you kind of do. But I mean, once you do, it makes people who follow you really engaged on when you post new stuff or when you start talking about new topics, because they know it's coming from you right away.
Yeah. And I would say, like, here at Indepreneur, most of our team falls within one of two camps in marketing, which is direct response versus Madison Avenue, right? So direct response is like, hey man, let's get some sales, generate some customers, and then worry about what the business cards look like, right. Like let's not put the cart before the horse. Madison Avenue is like, oh, you're Coca-Cola. Let's tell the whole world that you sell happiness. Like that's Madison Avenue style branding. Oh, you're Toyota. Let's make everyone feel safe and comfy with a 30-second television spot. It's not about generating sales. It's about generating brand equity. And this is definitely like what we're saying here falls on that Madison Avenue side of things where it's like, look, you're not going to get a result by doing this. You're not going to brand yourself and tomorrow, be a solid business. And I think we provide enough information about getting a more immediate result. This is about setting yourself up long term and about, what if you're successful? What if you do so much great direct response that now you have a large customer base, a large fan base? What do they feel about you? How do you direct their feelings towards you? How do you, sculpt that emotion and that experience that they have with your brand? And that's this stuff. So out of all the Madison Avenue style marketing things you could do, this is probably the least expensive and the most beneficial. And that's kind of why we're talking about it. If you've listened to everything we've said up until this point, you might be like, okay, I'm with you guys. I understand that, if I'm a business owner with a product, that selling isn't evil. And I get all the points you've made so far, but I'm a musician with music and maybe some merchandise. How does that represent a future result that benefits fans? And I'd like to take some time to explain to you how it very much does, because it's very easy to misunderstand the value of music. We think of it as entertainment, and it kind of stops there with this vagary entertainment. What does that mean? What does it mean to the average consumer? But the way I think about it, and hopefully Jack can provide his own unique spin on it, is that music helps me embody archetypes. When I'm listening to Otis Redding, I am Otis Redding. I'm a soul brother number one. When I'm listening to Big John, I'm in the 1970s in New Orleans. You know what I mean? Like I'm that person, and it makes my walk to work more pleasant. It makes when I get to the office more pleasant. And you know what? It actually makes me feel like my life's cool. When I if I haven't been listening to music in the morning for like a straight couple of weeks, I get depressed and I stop having as much gratitude. But when I'm able to spend time in my body, which is Da Vinci talks a lot about in, I think, podcast episode 89, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. But Da Vinci talks about how your body's bigger than your mind. It is the higher power. And you don't spend a lot of time in your body, tragically, not enough. And spending time in your body is when the brain kind of is put on idle and the music takes hold. And now you are this character in your own movie. There's so much existential value baked into that. For the average outcast 90s kid, I would argue that the future result Nirvana provided was good for them. For the average grade school girl in the 90s, the future result that the Spice Girls and Girl Power provided was good for them. It brought them community. It gave them female empowerment. It gave them something to talk about with their friends and create friendships over, and something to be excited about for the future. It helped them embody an archetype that they couldn't have otherwise embodied without that music. And that's that's a lot of the value of what you provide as a musician. Everything from merch bundles to like an entire line of a theme. So like if you're releasing an album and you put out an entire merch line with it, bundling that all together. And then there's like really high ticket products like, a leather jacket or like a Letterman jacket, right? Like those can reach into the hundreds of dollars, and that qualifies them as Ascension products.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at that point, it's like there's a small percentage of your fan base that's going to be interested in this, but it's enough of them to offset the price of offering it in the first place. And this is where you can really kind of test the waters. Where if you're looking at, okay, like if I do a varsity jacket for an artist, it's like, all right, how many would I have to sell? Like based on, I'm looking at this vendor and there's like their first price break is at a dozen jackets. So let's say I can't sell a dozen, I sell 10 of them. So I'm paying the maximum price per in order to get these. What would my break even be, or what would my, margin need to be to just test this out? And you do a pre-order. And that way you're kind of getting the working capital before you actually get it, but you're not doing on demand. On demand, the products are very limited. So first off, they don't usually feel very special, but also, margins, all right? We've talked about it 25 times. So what that lets you do is it kind of lets you gauge like, okay, how many of my people are here? Like in this price point, and you're going to have people who would be in that price point, but aren't interested in that product. And like, that's okay, but you take pre-orders for that. And if it's very successful, you'll end up getting way more pre-orders where your quantity break happens and you're making even more margins on it. But what that allows you to do, if you have at least 5 people in your audience that you think might be willing to do that, like take a chance and do it smartly in a way where you're not, having to buy 48 of these jackets and you don't even know if you're going to move 2 of them. And also but save that money. Don't be pledge music. Okay. Like save it, hold it in escrow so that you can still order it. Not like, ooh, payday. But yeah, that's a cool way to feel out like, you might have a really small, we were saying if you have 400 to 500 customers, you're probably like deep into the capability to do Ascension, but you might only have 150, but you've got like 5 diehards, and you should have a product to answer for them, like we talked about in the first merch episode, is like always have something available for the next tier for whoever's in your audience, even if there's only 5 people who that might be for. Because you want to have a way for people to continue climbing the ladder. So there's smart ways that you can do it to minimize your risk, but also to make sure that you're offering that for your fans. Yeah.
So I would definitely say it's not just you go from like a $50 product or a $30 cart value to a $400, right? You can really narrow the steps or they can be big steps. And we would describe that as more vertical or sideways or horizontal ascension. So Ascension can be more vertical or more horizontal. And so I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to round out merch. There's merch bundles, which aren't very unique, but they're a great way for people to save money on a full line. Then there's higher tier merch products like cut and sew stuff, leather jackets, varsity jackets, things like that, or even really expensive like jeans or like dress shirts or anything like that. If you want to get into cut and sew, which is a whole nother topic, or handmade stuff. If you a band that I'm friends with, they're called Sumo Psycho. 2 words, sumo, like a sumo wrestler, and psycho is CYCO. And their singer, she basically takes like their merchandise. They do a lot of their own printing or whatever, but then she'll like hack it up and put, like studs on it or, whatever. And she'll kind of like change it up. And she's like, there's only one of these. Like, right. Get it. You have to be this size to wear this. And she'll model it, That's kind of the other end of the spectrum is one-offs and limited edition, which is like a product can be expensive because it costs so much more to create, or it can be expensive because it's so scarce. And with the former, there's a higher margin. You're making more money. And also it's not just that you're making more money. You're not just making more money for no reason, like cheating someone. You're making more money because it has more psychological significance because you put more into it. You spent more time on it.
All right. Well, next week we're going to be back talking about some different things. And actually, I did ask Jesse to do a few interviews. So we're going to be cameoing, because that's a word. I'm a creative. I can make up words anytime I want. We're going to have Jesse come on and talk a little bit with a couple of our previous founders. And I'm actually really excited for them to share with you, because we can tell you all day about how awesome something is, but really the goal for Indepreneur is to enable independent musicians. So I want you to hear from them. We empower them and then they empower themselves. And that's what I love the most about the Indie Founder program. So Jesse's going to be back next week with some highlights. And I'm so excited because I love my little founders. So we'll be back with that next week.
It's going to be so good.
Yeah. And Jesse's so great on camera. He's better than either of us.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a blast.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. So we'll be back next week and you'll be seeing Jesse on Creative Juice.
Can y'all really feel the East Coast, feel the West Coast, feel me? Say what?